Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. This is a training event from the Centre for the History of People, Place and Community, hosted here at the Institute of Historical Research, with my colleague Kat Nelson from the University of London Press. Basically, there's just the two of us speaking today. I'm going to be introducing sort of a semi-insider's eye view of working with academic publishers, and Kat will be discussing in more detail how we in academic publishing, feels a bit awkward saying that I'm in academic publishing, but Kat is definitely will look to market and to push and to get your book to the widest possible audience. So I'm going to primarily be talking about monograph production rather than journal articles or anything like that. And the reason, and I shall the reason we're doing it like this is because there are no end of help and advice for how to prepare proposals for academic books, and to some extent, what books should do, and converting, say, a PhD thesis or a master's dissertation into published academic work. What there isn't, as far as I've been able to find, is much advice about how that process works. So I'll be introducing both the processes and the ways in which the points in the publication process where you can push back a little bit, where you can, other places where you have to take what the publisher says as gospel. And Kat will be doing the more interesting bit, really, which is how you get that work once you've done all the hard labor of producing a book or producing a text, and putting that into the public domain and getting it to the audience that it really deserves to be. So let us begin. And naturally, now won't share the PowerPoint. There we go. Marvelous. Okay, my name's Dr. Adam Chapman, and I am a few things about me which hopefully explain where I'm coming from and about the relevance of my experience to what we're talking about today. Now, in the day job, I am a medieval historian. I'm a lecturer in medieval history at the Institute of Historical Research, and obviously I've published a few things, but also I am the general editor of something called the Victoria County History, which is the longest established, probably, research and publication project in English history, whose aim is to produce a history of every English place from the very earliest times to the ever-moving now. And we've been at that for 125 years. And we still haven't finished and are not likely to anytime soon. So in that role, I'm an editor, which is a job title that includes a lot of things. Now, partly, and most importantly, that's ensuring technical accuracy for historical works, making sure that you're not saying that things like doomsday books say things that they do not actually say. That can be consulting on illustrative material in published work, maps and illustrations, a huge amount of project management. To give you an idea of the scale, we're currently working with about 17 different projects producing histories of nearly 20 different counties. That's half of the coverage of England. And these are people, the work is being done by a mixture of volunteers, by academics, based around the country. So there's a large amount of feeding material into a central point, which is a little bit like a very small publishing house, but not. And the crucial difference is that I do not do the side which I'm going to be talking about, but I do act as the link between publishers, including ULP, and between authors. And that gives me a fairly unusual, I'm not saying it's unique, but a fairly unusual perspective when it comes to the academic publishing environment. So as part of that, there's a lot of troubleshooting for both sides. And attempting finally to keep both publishers and authors happy, which is not always as easy as one might like, but it is not an unachievable goal. So what we're talking about today is the process of taking work from I'll say a Word document to a finished book, a finished text. And that might be an ebook, that might be a printed book. For the purposes of production and publication, these are actually the same thing. All the work required for an ebook is exactly the same as required for print publication, which is one of the reasons why the costs are not so radically different. We'll return to cost periodically throughout my presentation. I suspect possibly occasionally in Kat's too. because it's kind of important to understand that publishing is not just a black box. It is not um, not simply about you put text in and a book comes out at the other end with as if by magic. And unfortunately, my slideshow has stopped working again. There we go. So, who do we work with? Well, in my job, I work with the University of London Press to produce a range of paperbacks, and with a academic press, quite an interesting organisation called Boydell and Brewer. They're sort of employee-owned, sort of not quite a cooperative, but that sort of principle. Boydell are best known for their work on medieval history, but also on music history, um, and 18th century materials, and work on literary history. They're very well respected, and I must say, as you OLP are, an absolute pleasure to work with, staffed by great people. And that's generally the case in publishing. You do not meet that many people who are not generally trying to do their best and trying to do the best for their authors, and to make life easy for everybody. So, a first thing to bear in mind is what academic publishers actually do. And it's completely different to what trade presses do, but at the same time, it looks sort of the same from the outside. Now, this is lifted from the Penguin Random House website. It's worth remembering that Penguin are a trade press. They are there to sell books by quite a large number of units, and this is what you'll see in Waterstones. You do not generally see academic books of the sort I'm talking about today in your high street bookshop, and there's a good reason. There's a series of good reasons for that, but so what might authors expect? Well, everything from copy editing to media training of authors and illustrators. This does not happen in the academic side. Creating marketing materials to promote the book, which does happen. Deciding which retailers might stock the book and persuading newspaper and magazine editors to run reviews. So academic publishing is the same but different. You're very unlikely to find your work reviewed in anything in the Sunday Times, in the weekend papers. You're not going to find it unless you're doing something like a new volume of a very famous text, making much of a way of conventional media impression. That's not anything to do with you. That is because you're producing something that's quite niche. And that's fine. So, but it requires a different way of thinking about things and a fair understanding that the work required is spread over a smaller number of units. The world might need your book, but it doesn't need very many copies of it. Just the way it is. So, what do academic presses think they actually do? Well, here's what Boydell and Brewer say on their website, and you'll find that most publishers have a sort of statement of what they're about somewhere around there, and your chosen publishing partner will have something like this too. It's always worth looking at publishers' websites to see what their guidance and see where they're coming from. I think it's a really helpful thing to do. Will take you 5 minutes and will save you quite a lot of frustration later. It may cause other frustrations, but that's by the by. So they will also they commit to quality research, and Boydell certainly do mean what they say when they're talking about one-to-one support. They are incredibly helpful, and I've heard good things about most academic presses. All the university presses, for example, offer a similar sort of one-on-one if not face-to-face, then really helpful, accessible, and supportive in the process of getting your work from a very simple Word document to a sophisticated and hopefully attractive and well-presented book. Production standards, similarly, we could talk about print on demand, we can talk about print runs, but only if you want to. I'm not intending to address that today, but production quality is something which you should look for in a publisher. Are their books nice to the touch? Do you think, if you want them to be an ambassador for your work, because that's what it amounts to. If the viewers concentrating on the shoddy paper and errors in typesetting, then you're not going to get your work across. Open access is an increasingly important part of the academic publishing environment, and University of London Press have a specialism in open access monographs, which are very worth looking into. Kat can answer questions about that to a certain extent. It's not really her brief, but it's something that we can do. So recommendations, I mean, how do you find your publisher? Boydell have a good reputation, so do lots of others. And I'm not going to talk much about commissioning and proposals today. You can find out about that elsewhere, but do think whether your work, if you're pitching to a publisher, is what that publisher does. It might be lovely to have a CUP or an OUP title in your CV, But if your work is not doing the sort of thing they do or doesn't fit into a series that they publish, then you'd be better off looking elsewhere. That's, but again, talk to your colleagues, talk to your friends, talk to contacts, and they will give you their advice. So a few sort of pointers. It's not, and I can't emphasize this enough, a printing service. This is not, the idea is not a vanity press. You don't sort of submit your thing and they produce a nice looking book, and it's an active process. And at every level, you're expected to engage with the publisher, and the publisher should be expected to engage with you too. And if they don't, that's a big red flag, and maybe you should look elsewhere. So various different processes, broadly very broken down into commissioning, which is where you deal with publishers' agents or reduction directors. And they will proceed, and that's the part of receiving proposals, selecting titles from those proposals, setting deadlines for the submission of text, which is a process of negotiation. If they say we want your copy in 6 months' time, and you are busy teaching, say, or have just had a small child, then that's not going to be practical, and you should say so, and you should spell that out up front. Publishers do not mind this. They may not like it, but they do accept that people live lives and doing things other than writing books. And also, as part of that commissioning process, you'll find that in academic circles that a key part of that is arranging peer review and managing that process. Once you're clear of that, you're in the process of feeding into editorial, which includes things like copy editing, handling author queries as a result of peer review and copy editing, corrections of proofs, suggestions, and it might include, as part of, from the publisher side, academic editing and fact checking. It may not do. It depends on the size of the publisher. It depends on what they're trying to do. So a lot of that might be on you as an author. We'll talk more about the division of labour and division of responsibilities later. Then we include production, which is the nitty gritty of actually making a book out of the text, which includes things like typesetting, importing corrections to typeset text, printing, although that's normally outsourced. Very few publishers do their own printing these days, and elements like cover design, things that make what you're selling attractive, and marketing, which I will refer you to Kat because she knows far more about it than me and is better at it. So what's left to the author? Well, in terms of activity, probably relatively little. In terms of commitment and worry, quite a lot. Now, obviously, the research and preparation of text should go without saying, but I'll mention it anyway, because it's your work, it's got your name on it, as well as the publishers, but they're putting your work into the public eye. The contentious one is probably preparing, commissioning, and paying for illustrations and cartography. Now, that is generally in the academic presses, that's generally borne by the authors, and that for that reason you should bear in mind that if you're choosing illustrations, they come with a cost for licensing. There is currently a bit up in the air about copyright and ownership of public collections. But the process of copyright were covered in a session on illustrations, which we did last week, and we're recording available on the website soon. One of the reasons why that's not something that presses can necessarily support themselves is because margins are quite tight in academic publishing. You may think of these people you may hear of the likes of Elsevier and whatever making large profits, but they're doing that on the journal side, they're doing that on licensing, and the print side and publishing side. You're not making big returns on the investment of time and effort and making these books. And these processes are difficult and specialist and professional, and people deserve the right to be paid for them. It's unfortunate I have to spell that out, but it is not a cost. So not a cost that publishers can readily bear. So if you need maps, then you need to go to a cartographer or have someone draw them up for you. If you need illustrations, you'll need to prepare those yourself. The other one is indexing. This is something you can do yourself. It's hard work. It's not necessarily straightforward. And arguably, it's better done by somebody else. But again, that costs money. Freelance indexes are available. They can be found. The going rate set by the Society of Copy Editors and Indexers is round about £10 per 1,000 words of text. So if you're publishing an 80,000 word monograph, that's 800 quid. That is not easy money to find. And you may struggle to do it, which is why a lot of people do it themselves. If you have access, it's the kind of thing that there are grants and various funding sources available for it, but that's beyond the premise of what I'm talking about today. But to bear in mind that these are things that the author is expected to do. It's not a problem. So given a sense of how these things work, I've mentioned these sort of headings. So there's quite a lot of things that lead up to a book coming into existence. And that, as I say, print book or ebook, these processes are all basically the same. The way things are done are fundamentally similar, and how you process the actual process of creating the book, the physical process of the book, is the cheap bit. To give you an idea, we're just publishing a paperback volume of 60,000 words. The unit price for printing for a run of, I think, 200, 250 is about about £2.40 a copy. The cover price is £14.99, I think. So that gives you a sense of where the costs are actually born. They're born in the actual production of the thing that goes into the thing that gets printed. I think the printing is the cheap bit, roughly speaking. So commissioning feeds into submission, feeds into editorial, feeds into production, and then at the end of it, you get the product, the book. Commissioning is not the process of proposal and acceptance and so on is usually, but not always, explained very well on publishers' websites. Go to your chosen publisher, see what they do, and see how they want these things formatted. If you do not format it in a way they like or a way they recognize, they're more likely to say no, and you've wasted your time, and they've wasted their time. So if you're starting from a thesis, there's an enormous amount of advice out there. Most of it very good. There's a very helpful book which was recommended when I turned my dissertation into a book by a chap called William Germano, which is called very simply From Dissertation to Book. And it is set out in a way to say, well, why publish what you're doing as a book in the first place? What should an audience expect? How is the audience for PhD, for example, different to that for a printed volume? Because they are different, and they are very, they're complementary. There's some overlap, but what you want to do is to use the material you've created and to put it in a way that's more accessible, fundamentally. So if this is also successful, you should agree a timetable for presentation of that copy to the publisher. And if you can't meet that point, do let them know. They want, they don't want to be difficult. They don't want to have to send tetchy emails saying, where is this? They're generally in the kind of presses we deal with are generally led by very understanding, very helpful people. And they want to make allowances without getting unhappy. So this brings us on to what a submission should include. This is something that can be a bit daunting, and it's certainly worth taking time over. Key things it should be are full and complete. You can't just say, I'm going to send a chapter along later. That's no use to anybody. It just sits on a hard drive and nothing happens to it. We cannot process incomplete submissions. Your publishers will have very detailed instructions about what they want. And if you're not sure what they want, ask the question. That's their job. From my point of view, what I want from a submission is that the files should be. Do not present your entire book if it's 80 to 100,000 words, or even it's 50,000 words in one file. Your computer will run slowly. It makes it a pig to edit, and it just makes everyone's life that little bit more difficult. If you do it writing in chapters, by all means, best thing to do is to break it up into chapters. And the file name format that works is 001, 002, 003. If you do 1, 2, 3, 4, when you get to 10, what Microsoft tends to do, and we are in a Microsoft world, better or worse, is to go 1, 10, 2, 3, 4, and that's just difficult. But the full text should be provided all at once. With any contents or prelims. Prelims is a sort of publishing term for stuff that comes before the content of the book, i.e., contents pages, lists of files, lists of figures and illustrations, if applicable. Not every book has them. Any acknowledgements or a foreword you want to include. Not the index, because you can't do that from what you've got. Any page numbers you put on are going to be completely irrelevant by the time you get a typeset copy. So any illustrations should include copyright clearance, which you will have to arrange and probably pay for. Sorry. And for their use, and that clearance should be appropriate to what you want to do with it. So if there's an ebook option as part of the publication package, then you need to specify that with the image holder before you start. Otherwise, it gets problematic, and the publisher has to do more work taking stuff down and making amendments, and that's not helpful for anybody. If you provide them a full list of file names matching the numbers, positions indicating the text, which is actually quite important. It's saying you are the author, have a much better idea of where you think a book picture should appear. And the way to do it really is to put a little insert into the text saying bracket figure 1 about here as an instruction partly to the publisher, but also to the typesetter, who won't know your work or just do what they're told. They're doing however many books this week. They want to make it easy themselves too. Captions should also be included at this stage too, if you can. If not, that's and writing captions is an art in itself, but we're not going to talk about that here. Thing to remember is while it's important to try and get it as right as you can, initial submissions are never perfect, and neither, to be quite honest, to finished books. We do try, but things always creep through. And I'm going to repeat this advice later at the end. Never try and read your published book. You're just going to disappoint yourself. Your past use, foibles, errors, irritate, and choices of words. Leave it 5 years, it'll be all right. So the editorial stage, which is sort of where the likes of me come in, it's important to remember that editorial processes are iterative, i.e. you might have one pass through it, and then it might come back for another pass later based on feedback. Now, feedback takes various forms. Peer review is the well-known one. Peer reviewers' reports are generally submitted according to a template, and their purpose is twofold. One is to tell the publisher whether what you've produced is publishable, and let's hope it is. If not, then there'll be two options: either reject on site, which happens. It shouldn't happen, but it does occasionally. I've never had to do it, so but I have heard stories of people it has happened to. But resubmit with modifications. And those modifications might be relatively minor, they might be quite substantial, and you may or may not want to proceed from that point. That is, but it's so if the peer reviewer says this is fundamentally fine, but you need to do more work on presenting this differently or whatever, then that's something you can choose to do or can choose not to do. That's something open to discussion with your publisher. Publisher may have a strong view one way or the other, or may not be very bothered. People are allowed to disagree on this sort of thing. And that's one thing worth remembering. You are allowed at various times to express your opinion and to just not do what a peer reviewer has said. Now, edits can also be made for personal satisfaction purposes, i.e. you found an extra bit of information since you submitted the thing. This always happens. Always, 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 always. Or for personal satisfaction purposes, you completely hate the way you wrote that paragraph on page 4, you've rewritten it. That's fine too. At this stage, later on, not so much, but this stage, it's absolutely fine. So you might call them technical edits. Copy editing is a different skill, as a different discipline. I'm quite a good technical editor. I'm a fairly indifferent copy editor because it's a specific skill for which you can be trained and qualified to do. So most publishers will employ a copy editor who is independent of the whole process. It's their role. A copy editor is reading for specific things. They're reading for comprehension, i.e. does this make sense at a basic level? They may not understand the detail, but does it make sense? For things like punctuation, spelling, and grammar, crucially, adherence to things like style guides, which you should always read before you start, but don't get too worried about if you get it slightly wrong. That's what the copy editor's job is to correct that sort of thing and to make sure you've got things presented in the way that they want, but to fit into their series or series style. But the key thing to remember about a copy editor, and I think a lot of authors find copy editing responses quite hard to deal with because they seem so obtuse, they seem so sort of, where are they coming from, is they're not subject specialists. They don't know the first thing about, say, 18th century romantic fiction or 13th century monasticism or whatever it might be. necessarily. They may do, they may not, but they're not right. They're not reading for that. They're not reading for that sort of technical thing. That should have been done at another stage. You know, your friend, your PhD supervisor, your colleagues know that is something which is not within the publishing process and academic side. It is very much um, a a part of the preliminary process to getting the book in submission. And a final submission, once all these things have been done, you've been back and forth however many times, is the result of that. So you have a preliminary submission, which gets worked on, and then you have a final submission, which should be what you want to get typeset. So timescales. Once you've got a final submission, now, publishers do vary, and this variation comes from the length of book, that comes from how many illustrations are involved, all sorts of things. But for Monograph, the time from final submission to publication is usually 9 to 12 months. Boydell, for example, will say 12 months. That's giving them a bit of margin for things going wrong in the production process. But realistically, they can do it in 9 if everything goes well, and all deadlines are hit. So the publisher will offer a production schedule, and I use the word offer advisedly because it's negotiable within limits. You can't say, I want to take a year over this. No, they're not. They don't want that. That makes a lot of people's lives difficult. And it makes your life difficult as well. You want to get this done. The best book is the one that gets published. The perfect book does not exist, but the best one is the one that actually you get the process finished and you have it, hold it in your hand or look at it on your screen. And the production schedule will include deadlines. If you can't make something for any particular reason, then do say at this point. But the schedule will include receipt of proofs. So it will take them a bit of time to typeset it. Return of proofs. So that means once you've had a proof in your hand, then getting it back to the publisher with any corrections. And at the end of that, there'll be a publication date, which should be what you're aiming for. Everyone's aiming for the same thing. Now, a small word on proofs. If you've not done it, they are quite painful, particularly if you've never published a book before. Articles are a bit different because they're that much shorter. Books require quite a lot of concentration. They take disproportionately longer to do. So you can get an article done in an afternoon. You cannot get the same amount of words in a book necessarily done as a multiple of that. So if it takes you an afternoon to do, say, 6,000 words in proofing, it is not going to take you, say, that multiple of 2 hours to do a book, because they're just more complicated things and they need to be internally consistent. And the copy edit. So there are multiple sources of error in proofs. The most important of which is the author, you. That's where most of the errors come from, because you either missed something, or you miswrote something, or you were tired, or you got carried away with writing that particular sentence. This is speaking from personal experience. All the errors in my books have basically been my fault. However, copy editors can produce their own errors because they might not recognize particular specialist vocabulary. I've said before, they're not subject specialists. Hopefully, if they're good, they should query things rather than just make corrections blind. Doesn't always happen, but there's a bit, writing at cross purposes does happen. So it's a thing to watch for. Copy edits are the ones that cause embarrassing errors. Typesetters just tend to sort of they can either misspell something or put things in the way you don't quite want. That is something you can challenge at proof stage. Positioning of images, that sort of thing, that's something else you can change at proof stage. But errors is what you're looking for. You should not be trying to rewrite things because you don't like stuff once you've got it in proof, because that affects pagination, that requires resetting, that affects when the book gets published. And if you've got a particular target in mind, like a particular conference, a particular anniversary or something, questions that get asked in the marketing brief, then you have to bear in mind that sometimes you just have to let these errors go. It's difficult. No one likes doing it, but sometimes you just have to admit that it's going to be as good as it gets. Again, the book that gets published is the good book. The book that doesn't get published doesn't exist. There is no such thing as perfection in this world. Final processes. So indexing, which I mentioned before, is usually done at first proof. So the index can be included in the second proof. You should be aiming to keep it down to 2 proofs, because that starts to get, you get into the law of diminishing returns. You ain't going to spot errors that have been introduced in second proof in third or fourth, because it's just, you've read the text so often. Useful tip, incidentally, for checking proofs is try read from the bottom of the page up. Best tip I've ever been given about copy editing, because you read things out of order and you spot things that sing out in a way, in a completely different way. Your eyes and brain work differently. It's quite interesting. Cover design, again, this is a process of negotiation. For the kind of books we're talking about, it's not necessarily going to impact sales. They're not going to be on a high. They're very rarely going to be on a high street bookshelf. They're not going to be seen by. Well, Cat may have a different view, but it's nice to have a good looking cover. It makes you feel better about what you've done, but there is a cost to that. The Ibstock one is case in point. Actually, we that image, finding an image of an attractive, personable image of a Midlands industrial village is quite difficult. And we had to have two goes at this one. And Pam, the author, won't mind me pointing out that her initial choice of image, and this is the logical thing to do, it points to the mining heritage and some elements of the community of the place described. Had a certain amount of detritus, including I think an abandoned Christmas tree in the middle of the frame, and we had to say, could you mind? Okay, we understand your choice, reasons for choice, but could you go back and take it again with having moved all the rubbish out of the way, which he did, and that's why So you choose something that suits, and it might be an image you pay for, or it might be an image depending on what you're doing you take yourself. There are certain standards to indexing I've already mentioned. And there will be guidance on how to do that. The Society of Indexers have very good guidance on their web pages. If you have, they'd rather you paid one of their members, but they have recognised that it's an expensive process. Not everyone can afford. They have good guidance. It's worth having a look. Sign off. The key thing about sign off is both you, the author, and the publisher have to be happy. And again, this is another area where there may be a bit of negotiation and emails back and forth, but ultimately it's a mutual decision. You both have to be happy to go to print, because after you go to print, there's a limit to what you can do to change things. So you get your new book. You get your copies, complimentary copies. That will be set out in your contract. It depends on the publisher as to how many you get in the box, and it's all exciting and shiny. I've said don't try to read it. I do mean that. I know full well you are going to try to read that. That's fine. Maybe, unless you've got more self-restraint than I have. But things you should do are to check. This is going to sound really silly, but to check all the pages are in the right place in the right order, and you have all the pages. This has happened to us. There is a volume which I'm not going to tell you which one it is. If you pick up any copy of this volume you find in a library, it will fall open in the same place. That is because pages 136 to 142 did not get bound in the first time. Oops. So we had to have a recall, and there are ways around this. There's something called a tip-in, which you can glue into the spine. That's why they fall open in the same place. But that's worth checking. It is worth checking that, at least, to make sure that the complete book is there, because it's much better that you see it and send a grumpy email to the publisher saying this is not on, than it is for it to be discovered by reviewers when they review the book for an academic journal. Okay. So and Kat will come and talk about this in more detail, plug your book shamelessly. It's an academic text. There are a limited number of people who care about it, but you should tell them. How you go about telling them is another thing. The other thing, and is worth bearing in mind, is do register your work with the Authors Collecting and Licensing Society if you have retained the copyright. Really important. It costs £36 to join, and they take that £36 off your first payment. They do 2 payments a year. It's all explained on their website as to where the money comes from, but it's best regarded as magic. Basically, people who use and reuse your material by photocopying or by using it in teaching or whatever pay a fee for that. Pay a fee for that use privilege, and that fee gets collected by the ALCS, and they disperse the fees back to you. Public lending right can be joined up to at the same time. If your book turns up in public libraries, you get a small sum for every time it gets taken out. Your publisher should tell you to do this, but may not. So I'm telling you now. So do it. It is a surprisingly useful sums of money turn up. So my last payment went towards a new dishwasher. because that's the kind of life you lead. But it is that order of money. It's not going to be life-changing, but it might mean that you can replace things, do things around the house, or have it, or go towards, a decent holiday. It's money that you are owed, which you should ask for. Um, so, and then you should go put it on your shelf and enjoy having published a book. It's a difficult thing to do. Most people do not do it. Most people who do PhDs do not publish a book. I have several members of family who have done PhDs. I'm the only one of them to have published. So it's worth bearing in mind that if you're going to do, being a published author is a nice thing to be. It is the sense of personal satisfaction is key, but working with publishers need not be a frustrating process. They don't want it to be. You don't want it to be. So just go with the flow. And remember, most people you deal with will be nice. They're not trying to make your life difficult. And that's certainly been my experience with ULP. It's certainly my experience with Boydell, with Manchester University Press, with Routledge, with all particularly university presses. They're really good stuff by really good people. So that takes us on to what Kat's got to say. And I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Kat Nelson. I'm just going to stop sharing now. Kat, over to you. And you're on mute, Kat. Sorry, Kat. You're sorry, Kat. You're still on mute. Don't think I can do that. Unmute you remotely. If you go into the bit that show the little square that shows you, mute will turn up in the top right hand corner. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
There we go. I can hear you now.
There we go. Right. Can you wait 1 second while I share my presentation? Go. Right. Sorry, I had some difficulty finding the right option there. Hopefully everyone can see this now. And I'm going to hopefully put it on presenter mode. There we go. Great. So I'm Katherine Nelson, as I've said, Sales and Marketing Manager at the University of London Press. So I try and get our books out to the widest readership possible. And my background is in academic publishing. I've worked in marketing at Bloomsbury Academic and Palgrave Macmillan. And I was also previously Director of Marketing at Lonely Planet in travel publishing, and also Director of Sales and Marketing at an indie trade publisher. So I have got experience working in sort of different publishing scenarios, but I do love academic publishing. So this is what we're going to go over today. We are the University of London Press. Some things you might not want to hear. I'm going to ask you not to hate me or shoot the messenger, but I think it's good to be really clear about some of the expectations that authors can have at the beginning of the process up front. And then I'm going to go over what your publisher expects from you and what you can expect from them in return. I'm going to talk a little bit about book launches because that comes up a lot. A quick case study, a book that we've published here recently, and some further resources and time for questions. And yeah, that'll include what makes a good marketing brief and what marketing activities you can do that will really make a difference in terms of sales and downloads. So this is who we are. I've put a link to our website on the screen here, urlpress.co.uk, for you to have a look yourselves if you're interested. But we describe ourselves as passionate advocates for the humanities. We are predominantly open access. We are non-profit, and yeah, we have a century of publishing experience, not personally, but at the press itself. It's been going for a long time. And yeah, we try and give our authors a friendly and professional and very collaborative service. As Adam mentioned, I would say that most people who work in publishing are really nice, and you kind of can view them as like collaborators, and they're part of your publishing experience. They want to be helpful. But it is good to have the sort of communication channels open from the beginning. So yeah, we are part of the School of Advanced Study at the University of London, which receives special funding from Research England to promote and facilitate humanities research. So we've got a kind of service, we've got a sort of unique remit in service to the arts and humanities more broadly. And we're trying to kind of support disciplinary communities and offer new models and space for experimentation in open access publishing. And we have, we care a lot about high quality. Our books are rigorously peer reviewed, and we have won and been shortlisted for a number of prizes. So that's us. Now I'm going to go on to my being realistic slide. And as I said, don't hate me. But these are some sort of truths that it's good to start with. Your book's audience is quite small. As Adam said, you're probably publishing to quite a niche, small audience, and it is important to remember that. So yeah, that comparison with Penguin, that's sometimes unhelpful when you're starting off with the process and you don't know what is realistic. Yeah, we're talking about academic texts with a very specific market, and that's a good thing from a marketing point of view. Your book might not ever be sold in a bookshop, but it will sell. Monographs are mainly written to be read by faculty and postgraduates. The majority of copies are downloaded via open access platforms and purchased by academic libraries. And the downloads and sales are both driven by accurate and timely profiling. So that's getting the subject coding right, getting the descriptive copy right, getting the table of contents uploaded early, having all that in advance of publication is really important. And then your publisher is in charge of like efficient data distribution through data agencies and catalogues to influence peers and librarians to buy those books or to download them in open access. The bibliographic details I mentioned there, bibliographic data, it sounds boring, but they are really vital. Getting the book's metadata correct and the cover being as good as it can be, and getting those things in line with industry standards early on. They have to go in an Onyx feed that your publisher will send out, and you want to get that done way, way, way in advance of publication, and that's vital to maximise the book's success. Again, Adam mentioned the cover image and how important it can seem, but bear in mind that if most downloads and sales are online, the cover will mainly appear as a thumbnail. So does it stand out as a thumbnail? Is the title legible? These things are important to think about. And for example, if your book has got incorrect subject codes, it's going to end up in the wrong categories, and that can severely damage sales. That's the online equivalent to a book being misshelved in a bookstore so no one can find it. Titles. Authors care a lot about the title of their book, which is very understandable, but your publisher probably does know best if they're giving you advice about your title. They want it to appear in the most searches possible, even if you've got something that's kind of funny or seems like topical or more interesting, or it's the way you've kind of referred to it in your head. Without the key terms that people will search for to find similar research in the book's title, the book is less likely to be surfaced in search results. And that's even if those terms appear in the blurb, because the title has like a higher weighting for search engines. So yeah, your publisher is probably trying to help you if they give you advice you don't like about your book's title. The next point is that you are best placed to reach the relevant networks for promoting your book. You know your niche, essentially, and your publisher is going to lean on you for that information. Your book might be print on demand, so that means it's only printed on order. That saves on storage costs for the publisher. It still allows for very fast printing and shipping. These services have improved massively. The world might need your book, but it doesn't necessarily need all that many copies of it. So print on demand is a really good way around that. And for years, publishers have been paying storage, to have, you know, books in warehouses that are just sadly often pulped in the end. And this is for us now, for academic publishing, a better way of being. So yeah, to sort of summarize this, it's important to be realistic about your book and its audience. Be prepared to listen to your publisher and take their advice. Of course, ask questions, and especially if they use terminology you're not familiar with, that comes up a lot. So yeah, definitely remember that they are happy to be asked. So yeah, the greatest asset to your book's marketing campaign is you, and that's really important. But that doesn't mean you have to front all the marketing messages yourself. It doesn't mean you have to have a big social media platform. It doesn't mean any of that. But a book can increase your international visibility. It can attract the attention of leading scholars in your field. It's going to help your career. You've put a lot of time and effort into it already. So I kind of sometimes wonder why it does feel to publishers like authors sometimes can fall at that last hurdle when it comes to promoting their book. And the obvious answer maybe is that authors think they should be able to kind of leave all the marketing to their publisher, and they feel like they've finished it, they're excited, they've reached that milestone, and they're kind of done. Maybe they want a break, and they don't want to think about it for a bit. But like, that really is a mistake. It's such a key moment for your book in terms of sales and downloads at that moment of publication. Academic books can have a relatively short shelf life. Their biggest like shot at sales is really around publication. And it's certainly the main shot they have at getting PR and reviews, which can dramatically boost sales and downloads, and that's on publication. So this is why it's not a moment to step away. It's why your publisher might also try to tie your book's release to an anniversary or event, because that might help to get it some media or online attention. There are so many books being published today. So around the publication date is your main chance to help your book stand out from the crowd. So you ideally want to be your publisher's favorite author. And there's like 3 key things that your publisher is going to want from you. Pre-publication, they want you to fill out your author marketing form. That's something that all academic publishers have their own version of. We have our own version. And we would just say, take your time over it, fill it out to the best of your ability. You'd be surprised by the number of people who don't do it, or don't think it's important, or do it in a very, very basic way. But it's really important to include any useful information, any networks that you think you have, contacts you have. Think about the audience for the book and where to find them. For niche networks, it's likely going to be easier for you to promote your work to them than for your publisher to be able to do it. But your publisher can help. They can provide lots of things. But it's good for you to indicate on this form at this point in the process what you are and aren't willing to do, because that's going to save you and your publisher time in the long term. On publication, your publisher really wants you to do that promotion that you promised. You can ask your publisher for what they need, whether it's the cover image or the key marketing message you want to lead with. You'll want a website link. You could ask for a discount code. You can ask for a marketing flyer with a QR code on it, and then use all those things to your best ability to get the book out to the right people. You can coordinate those efforts with your publisher, let them know what you're doing. Some listservs, for example, don't allow publisher posts, so that's something that it might be helpful for you to be able to do. You've got to be prepared to kind of sing your book's praises yourself. You're the expert on it. It's really you that people want to hear from about the book anyway. And post-publication, your publisher might still have questions for you, for example, about whether you're willing to write a blog post about your book, or are happy for your publisher to pitch an article for you to write, or they want your agreement to approach a potential partner to publicize it. And the more helpful and responsive you are, the more likely it is they're going to continue to pitch you and your book for opportunities that they know are relevant, because they know that you're motivated and you're going to deliver for them. So that is genuinely really important and helpful. And these are the things your publisher wants to see from you. And then these are the sort of key promotion opportunities for your book. You really need to utilize your network. As I said, doesn't matter if you don't have huge social media accounts or you don't use social media at all. These things don't matter, but you've got to think of the mix here. So the social media platforms with the greatest reach are Facebook, Twitter, or now X, and LinkedIn. And we've also seen a lot of historians in particular seem to have migrated from Twitter to Blue Sky. So we've got a Blue Sky account. That's something you can consider. But if you choose one of those platforms, if you feel comfortable with it and you feel you're going to be able to reach your academic contacts, you can use your real name, a photo of yourself, list your research subjects to distinguish your profile from others, and that helps other researchers to find you. We recommend you use keywords, hashtags, find people and other organizations that focus on your interests and your field of work. And then you'll soon have a group of people to share the latest news and information about your book with and your research with. If you engage with people and use your account to build relationships with fellow scholars and maintain conversations, you will gain followers and recognition, and that'll open you up to new interactions and opportunities. And that's the perfect place to share your book. Your publisher can provide your book's cover image for you to post online. You could add that to your email signature. A marketing flyer with all the book's details. I mentioned it can include a QR code, so that just takes people straight to the webpage, making it easy for them to order it directly. A discount code, we give all of the authors a discount code. It's usually 25 to 30% across different publishers, which you're then able to share with your network. And these are all things that you can then share online and at in-person events as well. So if you're presenting at a conference, you can include a cover of your book with your bio, for example, and make sure you've let your university or your institution know about the book as well. And then I've got here some further book marketing tips for authors. I'll let you have a look at this list, but obviously a few different kind of specific things on here, including registering for an ORCID ID and share that with your publisher. Some publisher websites link to them. Ours does that now. I would recommend you join your publisher's mailing list. A lot of authors, I don't think, really do that, but it really is helpful because you can then see what sort of communications they send about the other books they publish. You can see when your book is included. So then when a nice email goes out about your book, you can then forward that on to your contacts with a personal note, and that can really help boost sales and downloads. We would recommend that you create an author profile for yourself on Amazon Author Central. Perhaps Goodreads might not be relevant, but it's worth having a profile. There's lots of different content you could create based on your research, as long as you feel happy producing them. So, for example, I mentioned blogs, also videos or podcasts for you talking about the book. If your university has a blog, you could consider writing a piece for it to engage readers and include a link to download the book. The whole thing about press, PR, again, on public, that's really important on publication, or if something topical happens, it's worth still getting in touch with your publisher. Books do often keep selling over years. They have this sort of push on publication, but it doesn't mean that that's it forever. So it is important to keep in touch with your publisher about future marketing opportunities, even if your book has been out for a while. So if there's a relevant conference or an event or something topical in the news that comes up, that can really give your book a boost, even if it's like years down the line, especially for open access books. And of course, remember that if you think that it does have broader appeal, speak to your publisher about that on publication. And then, for example, they might encourage you to approach someone at the conversation who prefer to hear from authors over publishers. And so you could approach one of their editors with a little pitch and write something for them. And we've seen that have a really good effect with some of our books. And so yeah, there's more tips like that in our we've got a PDF on our website that you can download called Effectively Promoting Your Book, a guide for authors, and a lot of publishers will have those kind of resources on their websites as well, so it's worth checking them out. So those are about what your publisher expects from you, but this is the list of all the things that your publisher will do to promote your book. It's a long list, and I could talk about all of these things in detail, but I'll just kind of go over them really briefly. I already talked about bibliographic data. In today's publishing landscape, it's really important. Really much of a book's success depends on information about it being accurately and widely distributed online prior to publication. So your publisher will ensure it's set up correctly on their title management system, and they will have already spoken to you about getting all that information. You'll have written a description. They might have rewritten it. You'll have probably given them information about audience, keywords. They'll create marketing codes for the book. And they feed to a range of outlets, including libraries, including bookstores, and online distribution partners. And yeah, bibliographic data relating to your book is really essential for open access books, and it ensures that platforms like JSTOR and OAPN can make your book available to the widest possible readership. What else? So conferences and events. We might sell or display books at relevant events and lectures held at the University of London, plus some held externally. We do have kind of access to regular events through the School of Advanced Study, and we kind of highlight titles and authors at those. But with reasonable notice, most publishers are able to send marketing materials to events that you consider important for the promotion of your book. So if you're planning to take part in any conferences or events, make sure you let your publisher know with as much notice as possible, and then they can actually provide you with materials to take with you. Catalogues, publishers create catalogues. They include information about your book. They send them to international distributors. They are key selling tools. They're sent out to universities, libraries, bookstores, and that gives them the opportunity to pre-order your book. And publishing is quite old school. That is still important. A lot of publishers will still create printed catalogues for their key sales partners. And it's also usually then emailed out as well. Online listings, I mentioned listservs. It's worth, if you're on any relevant listservs, to announce your book on them. Same with if you're a member of any relevant societies or other organisations that have their own mailing lists, they might be willing to share information about your book. Your publisher can also do that for you, or just provide you with words and images for you to use if you'd be more comfortable with that. Email, publishers have got their own email marketing lists. Email is going to be one of the key promotional tools for your book. I already suggested that you include your book in your email signature, with the cover and the link to the books page on the website of your publisher so that people can buy it or download it. If the book is open access, we recommend you include a link to the full PDF just to make it as easy as possible for people. And your publisher will ensure that your book is promoted to all of their relevant contacts. Same with social media. We encourage you to follow us or follow your publisher on their social media channels. We started a LinkedIn page not even that long ago, and it's actually doing really well. I think that's a good venue for us to promote our content. We also do have a Twitter, an X account, UOL Press, and the Blue Sky that I mentioned. So yeah, if you use any of those things, include the handle in your author marketing form. That means your publisher can follow you and start engaging with you in your research before your book even publishes, which can really help. And yeah, it's definitely fine for you to not use them yourself, but just share with your publisher, with your marketing contact, your publisher, any news that you think could enable them to have a reason to post about your book on their accounts. That's always going to be helpful for them, even if it doesn't come across from you directly. If you just email them and tell them, it's helpful for them. They can't be across every single kind of network that you probably are across for your book. Your book will also be featured on your publisher's website, and included in promotional campaigns throughout the year. We might encourage authors to pitch a blog post. For example, we have the Talking Humanities blog on the School of Advanced Study website, and that's a good way to promote your book. But there are obviously lots of other blogs, other relevant places that you might be asked to pitch an article to. And yeah, if you are willing to do those, to write pieces about your book, especially if it is topical or timely in any way, that's really helpful to know that from your author marketing form. Flyers and discounts, your publisher will provide these marketing materials for you, especially for conferences. And yeah, as I mentioned, you can do a discount code. If you want to sell books yourself, you can do that. Launches I'm going to come on to talk about a bit more, but they can be a really useful way to let people know about your book, as well as a moment to celebrate your achievement, and your publisher should be happy to provide marketing materials, as long as they're given a bit of notice. And book reviews. Your publisher will proactively target publications for review based on their knowledge of the subject area, and also based on your suggestions in the author marketing form you filled out. We provide review copies in either print or ebook form, depending on the preferences of the reviewer. Some publishers, I think, only do e-reviews now, so it's worth checking what their policy is. And there is likely a limit to the number of review copies your publisher will send out in print. which you can understand. There's a cost associated, so it's worth being aware of that and selecting the venues that you think are most likely to review your book really carefully. So just to go on to like launch events in a bit more detail, because we do get a lot of questions about these. I have got some bits of advice for a successful launch event here. This is this is something that I've come up with. I think this would help you create something that's successful, but it's important to say that most academic publishers don't support book launches now and won't pay for them, but they're happy to help in other ways if having a launch is important to you. But the image that a lot of people have in their head of a book launch is potentially a bit kind of old school now. I think, yeah, it's true to say that academic publishers have really cracked down on book launches over the past few years. They're not likely to have a budget to fund a book launch reception simply because they're publishing a lot of books. It's probably not a good use of the marketing funds they have available. But if your publisher is willing to support a book launch that you're organising yourself, they're going to want to know that it'll be worth their time and their money in terms of either sales of the book or raising the profile of the book. So that means having a good guest list, a good turnout, plus putting some thought into possible outcomes from the event. So are there opportunities to partner with an institution or society that we're involved with or that has an interest in the book? Are you able to make the event into something bigger, for example, involving another academic who also has a publication to promote, but will widen your guest list? Or could it feed into a bigger event like a series launch or an anniversary? So yeah, I kind of break this down into a number of topics to think about in terms of having a successful launch. And the first one is obviously the audience. This can be obviously your friends and colleagues or prominent academics in your field. Does it have any relevance to practitioners in your field, to policymakers? Who might raise the profile of the event as a guest or a speaker, and how will you invite them? What contacts do you have, and what can your publisher do? We recently held a book launch for a book called Before Grenfell, about the Grenfell Tower disaster, and we had a very successful book launch. The author was brilliant at putting together a panel. We had the MP for Westminster, we had a policy manager from Shelter, and there was a really, really great debate and great questions. It was a very thought-provoking evening. It wasn't about really just saying, you know, here's my book, this is why you should buy it. The author really cared about getting his message out and engaging with policymakers, and the event really did help with that. So yeah, think about the format. Should it be a talk by you, the author, on a particular theme or topic? Should it be a Q&A? Could it be a panel of speakers? Is it going to be solely academic, or is it practitioner focused? Is it practical to get people together in person, or would it be better to do it online? Could it be a hybrid event, so in person but either filmed or recorded? Could you share a case study with the audience beforehand to get more discussion going? There's a lot of different options that you've got to consider early on. Can it be topical? It really does help if you can tie a book launch to an anniversary or a significant date of some kind. It helps give people a reason to attend, makes them more memorable, and it might help to broaden your audience. Logistics. You don't want to hold your book launch on a weekday afternoon in the middle of nowhere in term time with no publicity. That's something that Adam and I discussed before I put these slides together. I think we've probably both seen sometimes these events happen and they're not really very well thought through or publicized, and it's such a shame because probably work has gone into it and it's a disappointment for everyone. It's a disappointment for the author. No one wants that. So, you know, choose a time and venue that's going to be easy for the majority of your desired audience. Think about the mechanism for signing up. This might be done through your publisher, and this might be something that they'll do, but you need to kind of know early on where the responsibility lies. Someone should be keeping an eye on the RSVPs. You should send polite chasers, especially to people that you see as key. And in terms of invites, you've got to be very clear on the details, share them well in advance to make it more likely that people will attend, because obviously numbers do matter. Make sure you work with your publisher so you know who is contacting whom, and always send a reminder of the details just beforehand. In terms of a display, make sure that your publisher has all the details and you know what marketing materials have been requested, when they need to be ready for. Think about what it's going to look like and what the audience will see. Allow time for the publisher to send marketing materials and set them up on the day. If you're aiming to sell books and have copies of the book there, you want to make them looking into like a sort of inviting looking display, and you might need to make sure beforehand that the space has got a table that you can use this, for example. A lot of people don't really think about where, for example, they're going to put the books, but that's often something. If you're booking a room, you've got to request that that beforehand. You've got to say, I need a table. If the event is being recorded, think about how the shot is set up. You want the book's cover to be on display, and you want the book to be mentioned at the beginning and the end, and for it to be clear how people can get hold of it. In terms of sales at a book launch, obviously it's a sales opportunity. It might well be something that your publisher expects you to handle, especially with a print-on-demand book, because your publisher will not want to be responsible for printing lots of copies, which it then cannot return, and will then have to ship somewhere and pay to store. So many publishers will want to sell you the copies you want upfront with your author discount. I've worked at multiple places where this is the case. So then you set the price and you sell the book on at whatever you want. I always advise people to be quite conservative with the number of copies. Not everyone at the launch is going to buy a copy. The book can always be ordered online. If you do want copies on hand, be clear about the price of the book at the event so people know what it'll cost, and can you accept cash or card or both. Your publisher might have a card machine you can use. But if you don't have lots of physical copies there, remember you can encourage people to scan the QR code on the flyer and buy it online or download it if it is open access. And finally, yeah, content output. Once you've put all this effort into organising a book launch, it shouldn't just be about the hour or so that it goes on for. Can you write it up? Can you get an attendee to write it up? Can you write about it on your publisher's blog? Like, offer to do that. They'll probably be really happy to have some content for their blog. If you encourage people to post about it on LinkedIn and tag you, you can post about it on LinkedIn. Use a hashtag when you talk about it online so your audience know where it is, like what that hashtag is at the beginning of the event. So if they're tweeting or posting online, they can use that too. So then that's easy to see all the content about your book. If it can be recorded, that's great. If it's a video, the display is extra important. But if it's audio, then that's still great. Think about the best way to share that, including with all the people who couldn't make it on the day. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions about that afterwards. I just thought I'd show you quickly a book that we published recently, a book called Freedom Seekers. So we did have a marketing plan well in advance of publication, and we did lots of things to highlight this title, and it did get a press release. It was nominated for awards. The difficulties were that it was a standalone title. It's not part of a series, which can be hard to market. It doesn't have that kind of series support. It's more of a one-off. We couldn't have an in-person event because the author is living in the US. And we were fighting against the fact that there are still some perceptions out there that open access can mean lower quality. The positives were the really high quality of the research. So we were really keen to emphasize that. It was very topical, and we had a really engaged author. So I've just got some sort of highlights here. There's a nice quote from the author who felt that it's a better book because of the support he received through the publishing process. It won an award, which included a cash prize for the author, which is obviously pretty rare. It was widely reviewed, including in the London Review of Books. It was featured in the press. It's had great sales figures in the UK, but also the US, despite the global focus, the London focus of it, sorry. It's now our best-selling title that we published with the Institute of Historical Research. And the online book launch hosted by the Royal Historical Society had over 150 attendees, and that's, as the recording of that is available online. There's a little screenshot there of an article that we had published about the press in the bookseller, where it's listed at the top of the list of key titles with a headshot of the author. And when I mentioned it's important to kind of get back to your publisher in a timely manner if you can, this is an example. I was given a very tight deadline by the bookseller who said we'd like to include an author headshot. And I knew that this was one of our key titles, but I knew that Simon was a really responsive, brilliant author to work with. So he's the person I contacted, and he got back to me straight away with his headshot, and so it went in. So yeah, working with him was absolutely brilliant, and I'm glad that he appreciated the process too, and really the book couldn't have kind of done better. We're so happy with how it's been going. Finally, further resources, and we do have a training hub on our new website, which we launched last year. We have a Publish With Us section, which covers a lot of the stuff that Adam went over as well from a different angle. We've got an author pack, which we tell people to download before they publish with us, but it's got useful information in there, and the actual recorded training as well that you can access. Most publishers do have these resources or similar resources, so it's good to have a look at them and compare them. Find the author section of their website and download what they have and go through them when you've got a chance. It should help you to make decisions about who you'd like to publish with. And one thing that I would say to be aware of is that bigger publishers might have more capacity to create these kind of resources, and they will likely have really good, robust systems for publishing and marketing at scale. But a smaller publisher will probably have more time for you, like more sort of human interaction, and therefore more flexibility and more communication. And as an example, like if you are published with a sort of bigger publisher, you might be able to download a marketing file from the website. You click a button and you've downloaded it. But if it's got something that's incorrect, or if they haven't added a recent review quote, it might be quite difficult to like get hold of someone, and then they've got to change it on the website before they can, before you can get a new form, and that's sometimes a bit of a laborious process. Whereas a small publisher will probably have to create something before you, but then it's likely to have things you actually want on it, and they can change stuff more quickly. And I've been on both ends of those processes, and there's positives and negatives of both. So it really depends what kind of experience you want. But it's a big decision. Thank you. That's it for my slides. I'll stop sharing my screen
now. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you so much, Kat. That was really, really interesting, really good. Have got any questions? Don't have to ask them on screen. You can put them in the chat if you so wish, about any element of the process or anything we haven't covered. We may or may not be able to answer that based on what the question is, but we'll give it a go anyway. So, are there any questions? Please raise your hand if you want to, or as I say, put something in the chat.
I see a question from Susan in the chat, Adam.
Okay, marvelous. It's currently waiting a draft book contract. What do I need to check to be aware of before you sign? Well, I mean, what you will be offered is most publishers will offer you will have a standard contract for what they will give. They will specify some things. Do check, partly, I must admit, for the purposes of your own amusement, anything on royalties, because chances are they will pitch to the point where they don't have to pay them. So a Boydell standard contract, there are a lot of them about, they will say they'll pay royalties over and above every copy sold above X. X is a number probably 40% more than you will actually ever sell, but that's just the way it is. Ebooks are different. Quite often you'll find an ebook will have a different royalty arrangement to a print book, and you may get something. So that again is incentivized. That might incentivize how you market a book. If you get royalties for ebooks as an author, then you might want to push those against print books. It's just I say if it's a publisher, if it's a standard academic press, then they will have a standard contract, and it should be probably fair, I would say, broadly, trying to balance your interest against theirs. Do check about copyrights and responsibilities pertaining to that. And if you want to run it past someone who knows about contract law, do. But as I say, generally speaking, you'll be offered a standard contract, and varying it is something that will be probably quite difficult. But they might possibly say you can. They might not. Kat, have you got anything to add about that? It's difficult in your position about conflict of interest.
Yes.
But it depends on the publisher.
Yeah, it does depend on the publisher. Yeah, I'm not the expert to say anything about how we do that at our press, but you're right. It's not going to be. It's a standard contract that we would be issuing.
Trade presses where you can, where you're aiming to sell multiple units, may discuss things like advances and so on, but that's really does not happen in academic books. So sorry, you hoped it might. Any more questions at all? Yeah, no, for Sons Susan, it seems a little daunting to actually sign. Yeah, I get that. It is. Um, don't worry about it. They're not going to try. They're not going to try and they're not in a position to try and screw people over. They're not. That's not the intention at all. The intention is to get, good quality, interesting work to its audience. That is ultimately what we're all trying to do. We're all working. That is our goal. Um, anyway, does anyone have any further questions? I should say that I'm sure we're both happy to be emailed about any questions that come up, occur to you after this is finished, and that will be fine. Kat's email was on her slide, but you can find us both. You can find us easily enough online if you Google, or search engine of your choice. Okay, so are there any? If there aren't any more questions, then I'd like to thank you all for your time. I'd like to thank Kat for her time and for her excellent presentation, and wish you all a lovely afternoon.